My next guest is the lawmaker who will lead the questioning. Joining me right now is Congressman John Ratcliffe. He is a member of the House Judiciary and Homeland Security Committees. He is also a former federal prosecutor. Congressman, it is a pleasure to have you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Always good to see you, Maria.
Let's talk about Bruce Orr, why he is at the center of this situation now. And in your target, you're going to be leading the questioning. What do you want to hear from Bruce Orr?
So remember, Maria, how bad it was when we all found out there was this unverified dossier that was used as a basis to gain a warrant to surveil someone associated with the Trump campaign, Carter Page. And it got worse when we found out that that dossier was paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC. But little did we know that some of that money that Hillary Clinton and the DNC used to pay for the dossier ultimately ended up in the account of the number 4 person at the Department of Justice, Bruce Orr, and his wife, Nellie Orr, who was retained and paid by Fusion GPS to work with Christopher Steele to help create that dossier. So next week, I'm going to sit down with some of my colleagues, with Mr. Orr, and give him an opportunity to explain exactly how that came to pass, and more importantly, who at the Department of Justice authorized it.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary, everything that's coming out. And after the president fired Jim Comey, there was this very auspicious text from Christopher Steele to Bruce Orr that we want to show you. He says, "We're very concerned about Comey's firing, afraid they will be exposed." What does this text mean? We're very concerned about former FBI Director Jim Comey's firing, afraid they will be exposed.
Well, that's one of the first questions that I'll ask Bruce Orr. I would like to tell you that's the worst of the text messages that we've seen, Maria, but there are other ones that are equally troubling that relate to the firing of Sally Yates and the impact that that may have. And that leads to some questions. Bruce Orr was the deputy to the Deputy Attorney General. So for part of the relevant time period, that was Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein has testified unequivocally under oath that he had no knowledge that Bruce Orr was in any way involved with the Russia investigation and in no way authorized it.
Yeah.
So it begs the question whether or not Sally Yates, who held that position before Rod Rosenstein, was aware of that fact.
I want to ask you about that because Sally Yates signed off on the warrants. Hold on, Congressman, you were talking about Sally Yates before we went to the break, and this is a really important point. I want you to make it. She signed off on the first 2 warrants to wiretap Carter Page, correct?
She did, in October of 2016 and in January of 2017.
So tell me why she's important here, because Bruce Orr was profiting from the dossier and he was reporting to Sally Yates.
Right. So he was the deputy to the Deputy Attorney General during that period of time. So the real question that we need to find out from Mr. Orr was he just a rogue employee acting improperly on his own, or did he have some authority from within the Department of Justice, and was Sally Yates aware of what he was doing? Remember, when she was certifying those applications to the FISA court, she was verifying the dossier itself. And so if she knew, in fact, of Bruce Orr and Nellie Orr's involvement with the dossier and forgot to say, oh, by the way, my deputy's wife helped prepare the dossier and they were paid for it, well, then under the rules of the game, how does that go? Do not pass go, do not collect $200. What comes next? Yeah, she'd have some splaining to do.
So will you be requesting to speak with Sally Yates as well then, Congressman?
Yeah, I think that after we work through current Department of Justice employees like Bruce Orr, we'll get to those folks like Sally Yates and Jim Comey and Loretta Lynch that are no longer at the Department of Justice or the FBI, and we'll be requesting that they appear either voluntarily or involuntarily by subpoena, if necessary. Because there's been a lot of documents and testimony that has come out since the last time they testified under oath before Congress that calls into question some of that prior testimony.
So just to be clear, you will request, or you are requesting, that Jim Comey and Loretta Lynch come back to Congress to testify?
Yeah, that would be done through Chairman Gowdy and Chairman Goodlatte, but I know that those conversations are taking place. I know those requests have been made. And again, whether or not they decide to appear voluntarily or are compelled to appear involuntarily, I don't know the answer to that. We can compel them to appear. We can't compel them to testify because, like any other witness, they would have a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination should they choose to exercise
that. So how far up the chain do you believe this goes? I mean, was this directed by Loretta Lynch, by Barack Obama, in terms of coming up with a Trump narrative that he had something to do with Russia?
Well, those are the questions that we're asking. Those are the answers that we're still trying to find out. And Maria, you know, you don't have to hit rewind and go back very far to remember when the Democrats were saying, how dare Republicans criticize folks like Bruce Orr and Andy McCabe and Peter Strzok, who are outstanding career officials who have done nothing wrong. And now investigations and firings and demotions, and in one case, criminal referrals later, we're hearing crickets from the Democrats.
Well,
because we're finding out, unfortunately.
Yeah, let's look at that, because you've got Andrew McCabe fired for misconduct, criminally referred. Jim Comey fired, under investigation. Sally Yates fired. Peter Strzok fired, under investigation. Bruce Orr demoted, under investigation. It's no coincidence that all of these people have been fired at the Department of Justice and the FBI, and this is just the top level. There are many, many more.
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, a lot of my Republican colleagues know that as a former U.S. attorney, they think that I'm the last person on Capitol Hill to believe that the FBI and the Department of Justice aren't doing the right things for the right reasons. But with respect to these Department of Justice and FBI officials during the Obama administration, color me convinced that there was misconduct here, and it's been reflected in those firings and demotions and criminal referrals that you just referenced, Maria.
Should the president be revoking more security clearance? Of course, John Brennan is out this morning trashing the president again, saying he's going to sue, and he doesn't want anybody else's security clearance to be revoked. Your thoughts on John Brennan losing his security clearance?
Well, I don't think you take a blanket approach to this policy. I like the policy of extending clearances to former intelligence and law enforcement officials for the purpose of being able to provide advice and counsel to their successors, successive administrations, including the president. But in John Brennan's case, he clearly wasn't advising and counseling. He was leveling accusations, as Rudy Giuliani just said, accusations of treason. He said that Donald Trump was a despicable demagogue who belongs in the dustbin of history. So I agree with the privilege. I also agree with revoking the privilege when it's been abused. So in John Brennan's case, I think it's appropriate. And with respect to some of the other people under consideration, I will tell you, Maria, I think it's entirely appropriate when someone at the Department of Justice or the FBI or in our intelligence community is under investigation or has been criminally referred or has been fired or demoted because of misconduct, that you revoke their security clearances. Why would you give them access to national security information under those circumstances?
So would you expect others then to see their security clearance go away, like a Sally Yates?
I would expect them to work carefully, again, not as a blanket approach. But, you know, the argument on the other side is that somehow by John Brennan and others that this is an effort to stifle free speech. That's absolutely absurd, Maria. John Brennan has just as much free speech without security clearances as he had with security clearances. He's going to continue to say terrible things about the president, and so will anyone else that wants to that doesn't have security clearances. So they're mixing apples and oranges here. Well,
it's interesting because what was the effort in July of 2016 to stop Donald Trump from becoming president? I mean, so they just completely forget what has just taken place in terms of the FBI, the DOJ, the DNC, the Clinton camp colluding together to try to stop who America voted for.
Right. Well, I think it goes back to a point that you made earlier, Maria. It's just because it's about Donald Trump, and the ends justifies the means. And in the Obama Justice Department and at the FBI, at the end of the day, I think that was the policy that dictated a lot of these decisions and why they were willing to violate or suspend FBI and department policies to get to a place that they wanted to investigate Donald Trump, someone who they didn't think should be president, would be president, and once he became president, they didn't want him to continue in that role.
Right. All right, we will leave it there. Congressman, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks so much.
You bet.
You may or may not know his name. We were among the first to report on him here on Special Report. But tonight, we're learning more about Bruce Orr, one of the people on the president's list whose security clearances are now under review. As Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge reports, documents show the Justice Department official may be a key figure in the Russia scandal.
As part of this review, I am evaluating action with respect to the following individuals: James Clapper, James Comey, Michael Hayden, Sally Yates, Susan Rice, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and Bruce Orr.
Orr is the only official on the White House list still working in the U.S. government. A review by Fox News of Orr's Justice Department emails and handwritten notes shows he is deeply connected to the controversial Trump dossier and during the presidential election, the scandal over alleged government surveillance abuse.
It seems like he's a key player.
Orr's wife Nellie worked for Fusion GPS. The DNC and Clinton campaign paid the firm for the Trump dossier based on research by former British spy Christopher Steele. After the FBI dropped Steele as a source for lying in November 2016, the Republican-led House Intelligence Committee found that Steele maintained contact using Orr as a back channel.
Bruce Orr's wife worked for the firm that the Clintons hired to put together the dossier. She's given it to Bruce Orr. He's given it to the FBI. It is never supposed to work that way in the United States of America.
During closed-door congressional testimony last year, the co-founder of Fusion GPS, Glenn Simpson, claimed no contact with Orr until after the presidential election. But Orr's work emails conflict with Simpson's testimony, showing contact months earlier. In December 2016, the notes also indicate a meeting in Washington, D.C.'s Chinatown, with Orr writing, quote, "Glenn gave me a memory stick." During recent congressional testimony, now fired FBI agent Peter Strzok was pressed on Orr, whose portfolio did not include Russia.
The FBI received documents and material from Mr. Orr.
The Orr documents shed more light on Steele's activities before the presidential election. While Steele shot the dossier to multiple media outlets, he also asked Orr for help with a Russian oligarch, Oleg Deripaska, after rumors the U.S. might impose sanctions. And when FBI Director James Comey was fired by President Trump, Orr wrote that Steele was, quote, "very concerned about Comey's firing, afraid they will be exposed."
Today, the Justice Department declined to comment. Orr has a chance to tell his side of the story on August 28th when a closed-door interview is scheduled with the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees as part of their joint investigation into the FBI and DOJ's conduct during the presidential election. Brett.
Continue to follow it. Captain, thank you.
You're welcome.